Whenever you're ready, Maddie.
I'm ready.
Good? Okay. So we just kind of wanted to go over a little, I guess, what we talked about last week, which was the many translations for nuyem and Ox's Dotsiu, put it into Haisla, or Haisla dictionary. So that some of the translations were law, tradition, story, history, legend, and narrative. So while in Haisla We Are History, the other book I will be reading from today, it says law a lot. Just understand that there's a lot of different translations for it, and this is just the specific one that was chosen for this book. Last week, we also shared a sort of summary of the nuyem and the details on the first guideline, and we shared the origin stories of the Beaver Clan and the Kilauea Clan. So this week, I wanted to get into the details on the second and third guidelines from the nuyem. And the third guideline gets into some stories about Watmis, about the Haida raids, about Billy Hall, and then there's some stories about different totem poles as well. Maddie, I don't know if you want to mention the stories you'll be sharing today.
I'm going to be reading The Three Sons of Chief Githuin, Mistreat a Frog, and a Bill Reed story about Nakulagula.
Billy Hall story.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. And then I will be sharing the origin of the Raven Clan, which is the woman who became a raven, and how the North Wind was tamed and became useful to the Haisla. So that's our game plan for today. Next week, because we got someone inquire about the story of Gubskolach, I've asked Dustin if he would be willing to share that story with us. So we will have that for you, which next week, a day before July 1st. July 1st being the anniversary of when the pole was returned to us. So we have, and I'll also be sharing the details of the rest of the guidelines, the 4th to 7th. So be sure to tune back in at the same time next week for those. A quick disclaimer too, before I get into sharing today's nuyem teachings and stories, that these teachings and stories that we're about to share are the intellectual property of the Haisla Nation and its members. They are not to be shared without the express written consent from the Haisla Nation. These stories are being shared today for the purposes of learning and reconnecting. Unless you are a member of the Haisla Nation, we ask that you do not redistribute this ancient knowledge and wisdom, which includes the stories that we will be sharing, as these stories represent our history and our beliefs. Thank you. So, flip to the right page here. So the first guideline for quick review was just to draw gratefully on the source of our strength, ground yourself in the power of the earth, and pray to Creator for help and wisdom. Cleanse yourself mentally and physically. Give expression to your deep feelings of awe for the natural world and its bounty by saying, Nolach, Nolach, Nolach. The second guideline, which I will share more in depth today, is respect and obey our chiefs and support our leaders. Demand from our leaders honesty, courage, and commitment to the people's good. Support leaders who listen to everyone's point of view and, without surrender, encourage negotiation rather than hostilities. Attend feasts politely, following protocol. So, for respect and obey our chiefs, our nuyem is clear that we are to respect our chiefs. Hereditary chiefs, called Haitmas, or for plural, Haitmas, were chosen for intelligence and good judgment. Young people being groomed for chiefdom were taught the nuyem and brought up to know the Haisla oral history and that of neighboring groups. They were taught dispute resolution and people skills. But, according to the nuyem, a chief must earn the respect of his people. His obligation is to be a person of good character and clean lifestyle. He must look after the people and be a good steward of his what ways. The nuyem tells us to show respect for a chief by never speaking before a chief and serving him first at a feast. Don't walk in front of a chief, nor pass one when walking in line. According to the nuyem, you always give a share of what you gather, berries, rice, and roots, to the chief. The Haisla chiefs traditionally had power. For example, they could tell people what to do and make them do it. So according to our nuyem, we have to obey the chiefs too. The nuyem prescribes how chiefs should deal with those who break our rules. A person is given 3 chances. First, a chief will call the person to council for a talk about how to correct the behavior. If it happens again, the person will be explicitly threatened if it happens again. And for a third offense, the person can be punished, banished, or even put to death. The chiefs inherit their right to accession. Our nuyem is very clear about matrilineal inheritance. The chiefly name, position, and associated wetwes ownership should go from one chief to a sister's son, or possibly to a younger sibling until there are no more, unless they are all too old, sick, unfit, or unwilling to be chief, and then to a sister's son. The nuyem says that chiefly names never pass from father to son. The person to inherit the chieftainship is chosen by the clan campfire, a circle of knowledgeable elders, but often the previous chief has the last word if he chose a successor before dying. The chief's wife and mother are important figures, and the law requires that they be helped and treated with respect. The mother of Chisi is Adet, of Sanached is Wilfbun, of Wakas is Simdig,
I just riding the bike across
Mujich, woman, the plural being Musmujich, is always involved in decision making. The nuyem says that chiefly women do not need to do physical labor. In the old days, it was probably done by slaves, and now it should be done for them by members of the clan and family. This relieves them to train the next person in line. Chiefly women should be trained for the position, just as men are. The mujich should know things like planning a feast, and she should be consulted. For the second part of the guideline, demand that our leaders be honest, courageous, and committed to the people's good. Our nuyem says that the Haisla hereditary chiefs are so important that the elected officials must never be allowed to totally overtake the role of the chiefs. The nuyem says that we should elect to be governed by handsome men and women. Nobody listens to leaders who are not smart. Nobody trusts those who are not honest. And nobody is comfortable with those who look down on the people. Therefore, our laws say that we are to give our support to those of us who are handsome people. For the third part of this guideline, which is support leaders who consider all sides of an issue and seek negotiated settlements. Our nuyem says, quite simply, try negotiation first. If all else fails, go to war. The Haislas were sometimes regarded by neighboring groups as cowardly because they always tried to negotiate a settlement first. But our nuyem requires us to negotiate with firmness and to be prepared to go to war. Our law applies to treaty negotiations as well. The nuyem says that we must use every avenue to work out a negotiated settlement. But we will have to go to court unless we receive an offer that is consistent with our nuyem's law, that we will never compromise our stewardship obligation to our land. For the last part of this guideline, attend feasts politely following protocol. It says, feasts are where much of the business of our traditional culture takes place. Our nuyem says that we have an obligation to attend our feasts, witnessing and remembering the events, such as passing on of names, paying debts, and cleansing exercises. Our nuyem has strict rules that apply to the feast hall. Because a shameful accident, such as falling down, spilling food on a guest, bumping into someone while walking around, can result in an expensive obligation to have a cleansing feast to wipe away the shame. Our nuyem says that parents are responsible for the behavior of their children. Although in the old days, you were not allowed to enter the feast hall, if you didn't have a name. Our nuyem now tells us that everyone has an obligation to attend the feasts and witness the events. So that's the details on the second guideline. Moving on to the third, it says, know your history, including the background of your tribe, clan, and family. It is the source of your identity and self-confidence. Listen to elders when they tell our story. So to get into more detail for this, the nuyem includes our history as told in the old stories. Our nuyem tells us that we Haisla people have our own history and that we are a distinct people. Our history is a set of stories, an oral literature that tells how the living creatures originated, how Wiget the Changer went around our area at the time of beginnings and caused many of the natural features of Haisla territory. All of these mythic narratives and legends are part of the nuyem that the elders pass on to us through telling and retelling. An informed Haisla knows these stories. They are part of the nuyem, and although some of these stories are private, clan property, the majority of these nuyem narratives are Haisla shared cultural heritage. For instance, the nuyem includes a set of stories about how a mischievous Wiget caused many, many things in the natural world, like making the bullhead's body tapered by squeezing the bullhead so hard it took on its characteristic cone shape. Wiget also stole the moon and put it up in the sky, discovered by trickery and secret design of the Enkana, the traditional halibut hook. And he tricked tidewomen into causing the big spring tides when shellfish and other beach life are so easy to gather. Traveling down the Douglas Channel, we pass several places whose names indicate that they are the locations of Wiget's exploits. These are all part of the nuyem, and these stories are uniquely Haisla. There are also nuyem stories featuring the ancestors of birds, fish, and animals that share Haisla traditional territory with us. These stories include the tricky playing of porcupine and beaver, which is explaining why porcupine leads a lonely and isolated life, the embarrassment of bat, explaining why he only flies at night, why goat and marmot, deer and bear, seal and whale live in the mountains, forest, and sea, respectively, and why the dog was consigned by the deer to live with humans, as a result of which the dog always chases the deer. Such stories explain why deer has a short tail. These traditional stories include, among living things, the winds, rainbow, and other natural phenomena that are not usually thought of as living. The nuyem also contains accounts of monsters and other creatures that would usually be considered unnatural. Among these are the Sanus, the water grizzly, a gigantic tree-like creature that lived in Jessie Lake, the Manzachses, a one-footed monster in Gituy's Inlet, the Thunderbird, the Kos, the Sasquatch monkey of Monkey Beach and elsewhere, the Kalok, the little people native to Fok Lagoon, a giant octopus creature lurking in Sioux Passage, and others. Finally, there were truly mythic, troublesome spiritual beings, such as Bakbakola a cannibal living, according to some, along the lower Kumano River, known as far away as Kwagyut, who called him the cannibal at the north end of the world. So our nuyem also includes the memories of our elders. Our Haisla community, clan, and family history is also kept alive in the memories and stories of the Haisla elders. These events and facts of Haisla past recall for us the origin of the Haislas as a distinct people and the founding of our clans. As opposed to the mythic narratives discussed above, which happened at the time of beginnings, when humans could speak with animals, and those animals were in the process of taking on their particular species characteristics, the stories of the Haisla history happen in real time, when things had already become the way they are now. Sometimes events in these historical accounts became bigger than life and have taken on legendary features in which the characters have a quality of superhuman power, but these are Haisla memories of real events. As such, the Haisla stories form the chronicle of our people and are part of our nuyem. The Haisla community members' memories, thus, extend from our tribal origins to the present and include incidents and details up to the immediate past. These remembered facts and incidences of Haisla history are our community's way of noting interesting and memorable occurrences that are not otherwise recorded or written down. For instance, the nuyem includes the story of Watmis, who later took the name of Khankli-Kolas, who long ago moved north to our mouth of the Kitimat River, settled in our territory, and founded our people. Stories tell us that in those days, our valley was all sand and no trees. There are stories that locate our ancestors very early in Haisla traditional territory, such as the myth of the feeble old woman left to die as cold weather approached in a camp along the upper Kitimat River. However, her family found her healthy in the spring, having been fed by a wolf that she had saved by pulling out a kneecap bone that was stuck in the wolf's mouth. Our nuyem includes several such stories, linking us at an early date to our land. When there are also Haisla mythic accounts that explain the origin of each of the clans: the beaver, fish, raven, eagle, and blackfish. For example, one of these stories that explains the origin of the Khanaksila beaver clan tells how the people originally had to walk everywhere, and the cedar tree took pity on the people and showed them how to make canoes. And the wife of the first canoe maker helped hollow out the cedar log with her big incisor teeth, and she was the maternal ancestor of all the beaver clan members. There are also origin stories for the symbols of each of the clans and many of the chiefs' names and symbols. Later on, but still centuries ago, the Haisla memory includes a long period of Haida raids. During this period, the Kitimat and Khanaksila communities chose settlement sites that could be easily defended and were close to a point high enough to serve as a lookout site. Some examples of those settlements would include La Days, which is the work island from Butedale, Tlilaka, give my pronunciations, Tlilaka Siukles on the lower Kitimat River, and on the rocky heights above Miscusa, the village at the mouth of the Kitlope River, whence comes the name Kitlope, which means people of the rocks. The Haisla recall that their warriors often beat off the Haida raiders. At Hentlich, a cliff just north of an old village site of Bisamutis, the Haida raiders who survived the Haisla ambush were told to all take their arrows and shoot them into the crack of the rock face, after which an artist named Kaya painted images on the cliff in red ochre. Khanaksila elders recall yet another Haida raid on the Kitlope that was successful at first, but while the Haida raiders were returning home with a canoe load of female captives, the woman tricked them. According to this account, the woman caused an icelet full of abalone to appear next to the canoe as they were passing Nuwakala, which was Cornwall Point. And when the Haida got out to get the shells, the woman caused the island to sink and they drowned their captors. Yet another Haisla memory associated with the Haida raids is that a braided cedar bark rope was stretched across Butedale Passage from Kiwi at the south entrance of Clecan Inlet. This raid alarm had pectin shells attached to the end, and when Haida canoes tried to sneak past during the night, when they crossed the bark rope, lookouts would hear the shells sound the alarm. All of these memories come from an early period, at least as long ago as the arrival of the first European explorers and traders, and possibly before. The great detail of these Haisla historical recollections show the extent to which the elders passed on their memories to younger Haislas, a process that has continued to the present. One of the totem poles that document Haisla history relates to the Haida raids and was given to the Haisla as a symbol that the time of raiding was over. The Haisla nuyem narratives give the stories of the totem poles that are a part of our Haisla heritage. Our totem poles are generally a depiction of a story, You can't read a totem pole, but the figures on our poles remind us of the characters and incidents of the story that the pole depicts. We know of several Haisla poles. Here, as examples of the cultural knowledge that our nuyem entails, are a story of two of them. For instance, there is a Chilacoon's pole, which has a frog on the bottom, a halibut in the middle, and a man in a Haida chiefly rain hat on the top. The rights to display this pole were given by a Haida eagle chief to Haisla chief Sanached. The pole is based on the design of a stick carried by an old woman who foretold the destruction of a Haida village by fire after young boys from that village killed a frog by throwing it into the fire. The Haisla Kapskolach pole, originally from the Chanaxila village of Miskusa and was previously located in a museum in Sweden, is also a part of Haisla history and is the only 19th century Haisla pole which exists. The pole has a frog on the bottom, originally, but that was destroyed when it was cut down. It has a grizzly bear underwater, as well Git, which was a spirit in human form, and the empowering spirit of Zuda on top. The story of the pole is of Eagle Chief Kapskolach, who suffered the loss of his children. Zuda found him grieving and gave him a crystal, saying, "Go to your family's burial tree, take a bite of the crystal, and call out for your family to come down." When he did this, the children rose from the dead and came down. In fact, the Haisla people have stories that give our side of early historic events and complement the records of written history. But the nuyem provides a view of the event from the Haisla perspective. For instance, the Haisla history includes an account of a group of Haislas encountering Captain Vancouver's ship near the mouth of Gildala, which is the Kildala arm, which we know from Vancouver's journals happened in 1792. The Haisla fishermen had been fishing and gave two immense spring salmon to the white men that they had called Kumsiwa because they seemed to disappear through the floor when they went below the decks of the great ship. The nuyem also includes community oral history that happened in the modern period of recorded history, but was never written down. For example, every Haisla elder can recount the story of Billy Hall, who was born in the 1850s. He is remembered to have had an encounter with Bukwas creatures, sometimes called Sasquatches, in the Miskusa area, along the Gardner Canal below Kimano village. Having accidentally killed one Bukwas, thinking it was a bear, he was chased by others, but he escaped, according to some elders, and he was able afterwards to predict when people would die. Another example from about the same time that our elders have maintained in memory is the marriage in 1906 between Lucy Bolton, who was the daughter of Haisla Chief John Bolton, and Heber Clifton of Hartley Bay. As a wedding gift, the Haisla chiefs gave the couple the rights to pick tihua, crab apples, in the Haisla territory from Blue Jay Falls to Fok Lagoon, a right that was taken back by public announcement at a feast in 1911. Having heard the story often over the years, the details of these and other events live on in the minds of Haisla elders, even though no one who witnessed them is still living. They too, as aspects of Haisla history, are a part of our Haisla nuyem. In terms of near history, Haisla community memory includes the passages in the lives of community members as they pass through life, birth, adulthood, marriage, and death. The memories of observant elders may include the details of the lives and deaths of 4 generations of community members. So that was more details on the second and third nuyem guidelines. There's a lot of stories mentioned in that one. And actually, where they mentioned the 3 sons throwing the frog into the fire, that is the next story that we're going to be sharing. And that is what Maddie's going to be telling.
The 3 sons of Chief Githuin mistreat a frog. As told by Jeffrey Lagac, and Chris Walker. Chief Githuin was rich and powerful. He owned houses and canoes and the rights to rich hunting and harvesting grounds, and he had a big family with many children and slaves who worked hard and were loyal. One day, he called the old chief of his slaves and told him that he was entrusting him with his 3 sons. He told this slave to make preparations and to take his sons out for a picnic. They would need a large canoe with 4 paddles and mats to sit on, fishing tackle, and a fish stick for barbecuing. They probably also took a little pitchwood and a small box with live coals from a fire so that they would be able to start a fire without having to go through the time-consuming business of using a fire drill to get a fire going. And when it was ready, the old slaves and the 3 young men set out. The slave leader had decided where they were going. He gave directions and sat in the back of the canoe and everyone paddled. They made good time, and when they arrived at their destination, it turned out to be a perfect place for a picnic. They unloaded the canoe and set out together to catch a fish for their picnic feast. It didn't take long. They had good luck and soon had a large trout that would be perfect. The old man prepared the fire and filleted the fish and started things cooking. When the fish was cooked, the old man set it out on a mat and called the boys to come and get it. But before they got there, a frog hopped up on the mat and went straight for the barbecued fish. The oldest boy, the oldest son of Chief Githuin, saw the frog and was disgusted. He reached down and grabbed the frog roughly and threw it far into the bush, cursing it like this: "You ugly thing, you spoiled our appetite. Make us sick. This is our meal. Just stay away from our meal." That's what he said, hateful and unkind. Despite that, it was long before the frog came back, hopping up onto the mat again and jumping onto the fish. So the second brother got up and went over and swore and grabbed the frog, holding it out and cursed it. "Oh, you ugly, ugly thing. Just stay away from our fish and from us." And he kicked the frog high into the air. He watched it land in a clump of devil's club, and turning, he returned to his meal looking self-satisfied. Amazingly, within a few minutes, there was a movement at the edge of the mat, and the boys could hardly believe their eyes. The frog was back, heading straight for the barbecued trout. Well, the youngest son jumped up this time and grabbed the frog, shouting at it, "You again, what a slow learner, yuck. I'm going to put you in a place where you won't jump back from." And he threw the frog into the fire. When the frog fell into the fire, there was a series of explosions and blinding flashes that just continued. The old man shouted at the 3 boys, "Run, quick, to the canoe, and we'll push out and get away from here." All 4 of them dropped everything and headed towards the canoe, but they were stopped by a voice from behind them. The old man stopped and turned around. There was a man standing by the fire, someone that he had never seen before. He started speaking, addressing himself to the old man. He said, "Before you get into the canoe, listen to what I have to say. Listen carefully and don't forget a word. Between here and home, you will pass 3 points of land. When you pass the first point, the eldest son of Chief Githuin will drop dead. Keep on paddling. When you pass the second point, the second oldest son of Chief Githuin will drop dead too. And when you pass the third point, the third boy, the youngest son of Chief Githuin, will die too. They'll all be dead by the time you pass the third point of land on the way back to the village of Chief Githuin. But don't stop, keep going. And when you get there, go straight to the house of Chief Githuin, and tell him this story about how the 3 boys mistreated the frog. When you get through telling him the story, sing this song for him. Listen carefully and remember it so you can sing it exactly as I will sing it. And when you are through singing the song, then you too will die. You will die because you didn't order the sons of Chief Githuin to leave the frog alone. It is a serious responsibility of the elders to teach young people to treat the frog with respect. That's why you will die along with those who mistreated the frog." That's what the man said, and then he sang the song. And that's the way it happened. The sons of Chief Githuin died one by one on the way home, and after the old man told the story to Githuin, he sang the song. He too dropped dead. There is still a Chief Githuin among the Haisla. The name is on Geddes Wilson. That song is still sung today, and we will still tell the story of the three sons of that Chief Githuin who mistreated a frog. Wow.
Awesome. So the next story we wanted to share to sort of complete all the clan origin stories we previously shared, we just have the Raven clan to share last. So that is the one I'm going to tell next. The origin of the Raven clan, the woman who became a raven, as told by James Robertson, and he told the story on August 4th, 2004. So this story took place in Ko'os, Kitlope Lake, on the left side, just as you enter the lake. There's the old village site of Yuhuetila. There used to be a young girl there who kept going from house to house, telling her neighbors the things that her family members said and did, and even things like what her parents ate for breakfast or dinner. She shared it all with everyone. Later, after she became a woman, she went across the lake to Yuhuajes. That was the Kilauea clan village that had come down long before from the heavens, slicing off a section of the mountain as it descended, making Tuguelamud, the hole in the mountain. At Yuhuajes, she met a young man that was to become her husband. The family agreed to the union, so they settled in Yuhdawala. One night, a voice spoke to the woman. Go up Kenkengatsi, the mountain which is just behind the village. So she did go up, and when she got up there, she stood on the edge of the cliff, looking out over the lake. The voice said, leap off now, jump off and soar. She didn't do it. She went back down, but she didn't mention this to her husband. And she kept thinking about the voice that she had heard, telling her to jump off of Kenkengatsi. The spirits wanted her to do it. Another night, she heard the voice again and slipped out at night, climbing up the mountain. And again, she heard the voice say, leap off and soar. But again, she went back down and said nothing about it. Her husband could tell that something was troubling the woman. And the next time she heard the voice and slipped away at night, he followed her up the Kenkengatsi. This time, she would have jumped, but her husband grabbed her and led her back down to the village. The very next night, the voice came again. She got up and went outside. The voice, as before, told her to go up Kenkengatsi. She hurried. She could hear her husband hurrying behind her, who had awoken and guessed where she was. She climbed quickly. She now knew the path well. And when she came to the edge of the cliff, she stared down at the tops of the trees and the moon reflecting off of the lake. And as her husband rushed to catch her, she leaped off and fell screaming. As she fell, spread eagle, she saw black feathers appear on the edges of her arms, blood red and black feathers. And she soared as the voice had said she would. She soared out and then back up, and she glided back to the cliff where her husband still stood. She landed on a branch of a tree near him. She said, I did what the spirits told me to do. She had become a raven so that she could fly around and tell the news and happenings and gossip from village to village. And she was the ancestor of the Raven clan. That's how the Raven clan started. So that was the origin of the Raven clan. And now we have some Billy Hall stories to share. He was also mentioned in today's nuyem reading.
Okay, so I'll be reading Nakulagula, the Haisla tradition of cleansing and toughening, and another story about Billy Hall. as told by Samson Ross, John Wilson, Louise Barbetti, James Robertson, and others. There are different kinds of naquilagula. An animal will know why you are out there and whether you are hunting or trapping or what. There is a story of a young man who went out with Billy Hall. They saw a grizzly coming down. The young man reached for his rifle and Billy Hall put up a finger, saying, "Be patient and wait." When the grizzly bear came down the slide, there was a pool of water down there. The grizzly went into the pool and turned and pulled up a handful of weed and rubbed himself with it. Then he grabbed some more different weeds, adding to the wad he'd been using, and submerged and rubbed himself with that. Then he pulled up some poison weed and added that to the wad and went under again and rubbed himself with that. Finally, he grabbed a leafy branch beside the pool and wound the whole wad in that. And he went under the water, and when he came up, he rubbed himself good again. And then he threw the wad on the side of the pool and got out, shook and went into the bush. Billy said, "Everything you saw was for you. Go and get that ball of weeds and roots. Then use that ball to naquilagula tonight before we go trapping." He did that, and the next day he got a white blanket-sized beaver. Billy Hall said, "This was for you." He got another one later and got a lot of money for that matched pair of white beavers. Also, that young man had luck with goats. He hung up 2 large goat skins, and the next morning they were gone, and there were wolf tracks. He followed the wolf tracks into a slough. There he saw the goat's head facing him. The wolf was there too. He started to aim at the wolf, but his Billy said, "Wait, let's talk. The wolf is testing you. If you had shot the wolf, your traps would have all snapped. Life in general would be miserable." Then, later, he got a large white marten. Magnificent. And then he got another one. Always from the last trap of the line. He got a lot of money for those too. Each event of this tells how the spirit is strengthening him and making him wise. Each time the teacher was Billy Hall, who was wise, passing on his wisdom to a younger person. Wow.
Okay. And then this one was requested last week. Someone asked about the story of the North Wind, so I found that one, and that'll be the one I share next. So, how the North Wind was tamed and became useful to the Haisla, as told by Gordon Robertson, Samson Ross, and Gordon Robinson. This is the story of how the North Wind was tamed. Back at the time of beginnings, the various winds were friendly. They got together, coming from all directions, and had feasts and good times. They even had games and competitions. One time, they had a rock lifting competition, and each of the winds tried to lift a great egg-shaped rock down by the beach. North wind and south wind were known as the strongest winds. In the end, southeast wind won. Oh, north wind was a bad loser. He stormed off, blowing with rage, sending an icy blast up the valleys as far as the mountaintops, and that's the reason why there are glaciers in our territory. North wind just couldn't control his temper. In those days, the north wind was totally undisciplined. But even though North Wind was so temperamental and jealous, he was still likable. And to the surprise of all other winds and animals, North Wind fell in love with the daughter of the Southeast Wind, and they got married. For a while, North Wind was too happy to be grumpy. The other animals enjoyed a season where there were only balmy winds and warm weather. But then, North Wind's old stormy nature started to reappear, and soon he was having fits of irritability, and anger, just like the bad old days. He would blow up at the slightest provocation and unleash a blast that would have the animals covering in their dens. It was during those days that the animals started wearing furs all the time, because they never knew when North Wind was going to send a shivery gust through the territory. In those days, the north wind was out of control. One day, the daughter of Southeast Wind decided that she had had enough. North Wind had always been very proud of the artwork that he made around the territory. His ice sculptures were a source of real pride for him. Wherever he went, he left beautiful icicles hanging. But the daughter of Southeast Wind would follow him around, and as soon as he produced a nice set of icicles, she would come along and melt them. Finally, North Wind blew up and didn't calm down for so long that he caused the Ice Age in our territory. His wife put up with him for a long time, but finally she decided that she had had enough. She went home to her father, the Southeast Wind. Southeast Wind was so disgusted with his son-in-law, North Wind, that he totally changed his nature. He got stormy and brooding and cloudy, and he called the other winds and animals and birds and fish and insects to a campfire, which is what they call a council meeting. Everyone agreed that it was time to teach North Wind some manners. So all the living things lined up to attack North Wind and overrun his settlement under the northern lights. They thought it would be easy since there were so many of them lined up against the North Wind. But he got wind of it and produced a defensive explosion of freezing air that blew steadily into the face of the attackers. That frigid wind from the north was so cold and so strong that the attackers broke ranks and retreated. North Wind didn't let up either. He just blew and blew. So the attackers decided to get sneaky. They asked Halibut if he would be willing to take on a dangerous mission. When they explained their plan, he realized how risky it was, but he agreed. Mighty Halibut took to the water and dove deep. He swam along the bottom where the awful chill of the north wind was hardly noticeable. He swam straight north, facing into the northerly wind, and soon he sensed that the north wind was at his back, so he realized he had come past the house of the north wind. So he turned around and swam back until he saw the settlement of North Wind, full of his icicle sculptures. Halibut sneaked up on the north wind. He crawled up on the roof of the big house. For such a big creature, he was very quiet. When he got to the smoke hole, he looked down and saw North Wind inside, concentrating on keeping his cold wind blowing without let up. So Halibut crawled over the edge and saw that he could drop right into the middle of North Wind's house. But Halibut was so big that as he dropped through the smoke hole, he scraped his back on the city roof timbers around the smoke hole and got his back all sooty. That's the reason the halibuts have black backs, even today. Well, when Halibut dropped suddenly into the open area of North Wind's big house, he caught North Wind by surprise, and the great fish immediately started flapping around, flipping and bouncing around the floor. He was almost as long as a canoe and weighed as much as 2 mudzichs. North Wind was distracted, to say the least, and while his attention was diverted, he let up on his ice-cold wind stream. The attackers were ready and immediately streamed into the compound, and North Wind was overpowered. A peace treaty was worked out. North Wind had to promise that he would control his stormy temper and blow predictably so that people and animals would know when it would be cold and when it would be warm. It was the beginning of seasons, and animals started to shed in the spring so that because they could expect that it wouldn't be so cold in the months ahead. North Wind promised only to blow in the mornings, too, so our Haisla ancestors came to expect that they could paddle or sail down to Sioux Channel in the morning and come home using the south wind in the afternoon with a canoe load of halibuts with their white fronts and black backs. So that's the story of how the north wind got tamed. It tells why there are icicles on cold north wind mornings and why the animals all wear fur and shed in the spring, and why the ice age happened and why we have predictable seasons. It explains why halibuts have white fronts and black backs, and it reminds us that when the north wind blows cold, It is just Old Man Northwind having a temper tantrum. So that is the story of how the North Wind was tamed and became useful to the Haisla. We have one more story that we planned to share today, and then we will be open if anyone has any questions or if anyone has requests for specific stories for next week. So the last story is Dudek Siwef, the Great Haisla Clairvoyance. This is told by Chris Walker, Jeffrey Legate, Louise Barbetti, and James Robertson. So, back in the 1800s, there was a great Haisla, Dudek Siwef, which is a clairvoyant, a person who has the power to foretell things and to see into the future or the past. His name was Tlisala. People remember that Tlisala could see the location of things that had been lost, that he could predict when the Ulakin could arrive, could suggest where hunters would have good luck, and could predict how long a person would live. He was very famous and respected. An incident that illustrates his powers is that he is remembered to have been able to predict a total eclipse of the sun. Tlisala predicted that the sun would disappear and would not reappear unless the people did a dance of appeasement to the sun. He emphasized that this meant everyone, including the Tsi. When the sun actually did disappear, everyone did start a frenzied dance, including the great Tsi. And when the sun started to reappear, Tlisala laughed that others had been fooled by a natural phenomenon that only he had been able to foresee. Tlisala predicted social trends and technological developments too. He predicted that people would be able to travel by flying and by moving underwater. He predicted that dress would change with women wearing pants. He foresaw celestial events that were thought to portend danger, such as meteor showers, considered to be a sign that some catastrophic event, such as an epidemic, was imminent. There had been other earlier Haislas who had such gifts as second sight and spirit power. For instance, Billy Hall is remembered to have second sight after having his encounter with Pequos. There was another earlier Chanaxila Dudek Siwef, an old man who foresaw the coming of one of the great epidemics, probably smallpox, and protected the people from the illness. The story goes like this. One evening, the old man and his grandchildren were out on the shore in front of the village. Suddenly, the old Dudek Siwef pointed to a driftwood log in the water and said, "It's coming! Quick, get inside! Run for it!" The children were puzzled, but did as the old man said. They were used to him being able to see dangers and disasters that weren't apparent to others. So they all raced into their traditional big house. There, they waited. The old man told everyone to get away from the entrance area, and he kept his eye on the door. All of a sudden, he shouted, "It's coming in! Get me my bow and my quiver of arrows." When he had them, he carefully took an arrow and prepared to shoot. There was no knock on the door, and it didn't swing open. But suddenly, the old man drew the arrow back, aimed directly at the door, and fired an arrow. The arrow flew across the house and then suddenly stopped, suspended in the air in front of the door. Got it, he said. People looked at the arrow hanging in midair, at the old man, and at each other, shaking their heads. But only the Dudek Siwef moved, getting up and grasping the arrow and giving it a pull as if it were stuck into something. Then he and others went back out to the beach, and someone noted that the drift log was gone, and that in the beach sand there was a mark of a canoe having been drawn up. Later, when asked, the old man told that a terrible disease had come to the village, but that he had gravely wounded it, and it had left, bypassing the Haisla, who were apparently too strong to be affected by the illness. So that is the story of the Dudak Siwech. Yeah, I don't know if you also wanted to share the spirit power one. I guess there's a little bit of time. Mandy, if you're up for it.
Yeah, I can do that. Why not?
Okay, I'm gonna leave you here.
So this is the story of Billy Hall demonstrates his spirit power, told by James Robertson, September 2nd, 2004. In Camano, there used to be a kind of hall where men would get together, especially in the winter, and discuss issues and tell stories. They called it Hiligatsi. One night, Billy Hall decided to prove his spirit power. He told a couple of the young men, "Go out and get me some long pieces of wood that won't burn. Set it up like the tracks of a railroad along the ground here." They did, and Billy raked the coals of the fire in white hot rocks along the ground between the long stakes. The stones were white hot. Billy walked across the smoking embers and hot stones, his feet popping like bacon on a grill. Then he held up a salmonberry twig. They got him one. First he danced with it. He went around once, and leaves came out on the twig. After he danced around the second time, there was a flower on the twig. The third time, there was a little green salmonberry on it. And then the fourth time he danced around, there were 3 well-formed, ripe orange salmonberries on the twig. Then he picked up a bearskin with the fur still on it and wrapped himself in fur. Then he danced in a circle. He said, "If you want to know how long you'll live, grab on and hold on to me as I dance by." The first person that tried to hold on to Billy only held on for 2 or 3 steps and lost his grip. Billy Hall told him, "You have 2 months to live." He turned out to be right. The second person held on a little bit longer, and Billy said to her, "You will only live a year." He was right about that, too. The third person held on even longer, and Billy told him that he would live 2 years. That's how long he lived. The fourth person was Alice Moody. She jumped up and grabbed onto Billy, and she held on all the way around. Billy told her that she had a long life to live. She lived to be in her 90s. Where did Billy Hall get that power? Who had given him the power to walk on white-hot stones and fire, to cause rods to bud, to see the future? He got the power from those animals, the bequests. That's the story of Billy Hall demonstrating his spirit power.
Yeah, so that was the nuyem teachings and stories we have planned to share today. I mentioned in the beginning, but some people have kind of tuned in since then, that next week we're going to be sharing the story of Gupskolach to commemorate the anniversary on July 1st of when that totem pole was repatriated to us. It was mentioned a little bit in here in the third nuyem guideline, but Dustin has a story that's a lot more in depth. So I've asked him if he can share that with us next week. That's something to look forward to. And then we'll also be completing the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th nuyem guidelines next week as well. But we just wanted to open it up. If anyone had any questions about what we shared, we can do our best to answer them if we can. Or if anybody has any stories in mind that they would like us to share next week, along with the Kapskolach story.
Thanks for sharing, Megan. Just to give everyone a heads up in the chat bar there, I included a link to a SoundCloud recording of the Billy Hall story as told by the late Ken Hall. And there's a version there. There's a part 1 and part 2 in English, and there's also a part 1 and part 2 in Haisik Ella. So those are my recommendations to play and listen to it from home. And to practice your Haisik Ella learning too, it's really neat to try listen to both versions of Haisla and English. So yeah, I just wanted to quickly share that's what the link was about. But great job, ladies, and thank you so much for sharing all those stories. It's such a difference listening to the stories than reading them. So thank you.
Mommy, can you
Okay, cool. Thanks for sharing those links. That'll be something I definitely listen to myself after this.